Greetings, dear friends. Your invaluable support is our strength. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. This greatly helps the growth of our channel. Leave your comments. Your feedback is very valuable to us. And now, to the most important and current world events. Let's go.
An SUV drove into a crowd at a festival in Vancouver. Canadian media report that 8 people, including a child, were killed and 6 more were injured. Police stated that the driver has been detained. His motives have not been reported. According to media reports, the festival was organized by people from the Philippines. On RBC, the main news in the studio. Marina Koolapteva, the demands to return Crimea to Ukraine are absurd, stated U.S. President Donald Trump. He reacted sharply to a New York Times article titled, "How Trump Plays into Putin's Hands." The criticism also personally targeted the author of the material.
Peter Baker, an extremely biased and inept writer from The Times, followed his editor's instructions and wrote that Ukraine should reclaim its territories, including, as I understand, Crimea, and made other absurd demands to stop the carnage, the worst since World War II. And this is sleepy Joe Biden's war, not mine. It was a losing cause from day one.
Earlier, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that he would never recognize Crimea as Russian territory. Trump emphasized that Kiev's official stance is detrimental to negotiations. The day before, the presidents of the United States and Ukraine met at the Vatican during the farewell ceremony for Pope Francis. It was their first face-to-face meeting after the spat in the Oval Office. The politicians had a brief conversation. The head of the White House said after this conversation that the parties are quite close to resolving the conflict. European companies have increased shipments to the U.S. in anticipation of high tariffs, Trump writes to France's press. Firms want to build up stocks of their products. For example, exports from Irish companies in February rose by 210% to 13 billion euros. The majority of this volume is accounted for by pharmaceutical products and chemical ingredients. In March, Swiss watch exports to the U.S. also increased by 14%. According to the publication, a similar strategy is being used by a French cosmetics brand and a furniture manufacturing company. In early April, Donald Trump imposed higher tariffs against almost all countries in the world. They were calculated based on the trade deficit of the states with a specific country. Most countries did not take retaliatory measures and requested negotiations. After that, Trump decided to maintain the base tariffs at 10% for 90 days for everyone except China. Donald Trump demanded free passage through the Panama and Suez canals for U.S. military and commercial ships. He wrote about this on the social network Truth Social. The American president asked Secretary of State Marina Rubio to, quote, "immediately deal with this situation." In Trump's opinion, without America, these canals would not exist. The states participated in the construction of the waterway in the first mid-20th century. In 1999, it was completely transferred to Panama. However, the U.S. ultimately lost the ability to place military facilities in the canal zone, but retained the right to transit military vessels. After being elected president, Trump stated that Washington would demand the return of control over the Panama Canal if the terms were not revised. But he considers the tariffs for American ships too high. In mid-April, the U.S. and Panama tentatively agreed on free passage and an increase in the contingent. The escalation of the conflict between India and Pakistan will not lead to an exchange of nuclear strikes. This opinion was expressed by the head of Pakistan's Ministry of Defense. Previously, this issue had raised concerns. The minister himself said that the world should be worried about the confrontation between the two nuclear powers. This time, he mentioned again that both countries have the corresponding potential, but emphasized that it is unlikely to go that far. The head of the Ministry of Defense also said that Pakistan in general does not intend to attack. However, Islamabad will give a proportional response if the neighboring state decides to attack itself. It is worth noting that shootings at the border have been occurring for 3 consecutive nights. Relations between India and Pakistan have worsened after the terrorist attack in Kashmir, which occurred on Tuesday. People in Kaki shot 26 people. New Delhi accuses Pakistani intelligence services of being involved in the attack. Islamabad denies this and calls for an independent investigation.
Considering the current situation and historical context, Pakistan has serious doubts about trusting India. We call for the investigation to be led by a neutral and independent body. Pakistan is fully prepared to cooperate with any neutral investigators to ensure that the truth is revealed and justice is served. Will prevail. Pakistan remains committed to peace, stability, and adherence to international norms, but will not compromise on its sovereignty.
After the terrorist attack, both sides began to impose mutual sanctions. Islamabad completely halted trade with its neighbors. India, among other things, cut off the water supply to the Ishu River, Indus, into Pakistan's territory. Local farmers say this could severely impact agriculture. The situation threatens food supply issues. Iran is satisfied with the progress of the U.S. negotiations on the nuclear program, although disagreements remain between the parties, stated the country's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi. He noted that the dialogue already touches on technical and economic details.
In the last session, economic experts joined us, and their presence was very beneficial. I suggest that in the next session we should also include experts from the IAEA. We are discussing only issues related to nuclear energy. We are not conducting
negotiations on any other issues. Although, when we talk about nuclear energy, we mean building trust in Iran's nuclear program in exchange for lifting sanctions.
The third round of indirect negotiations between Iran and the USA took place recently in Oman. The parties approached it without a unified position. The Wall Street Journal writes about whether Tehran can continue uranium enrichment. Iran insists that nuclear technology is used only for peaceful purposes. According to the newspaper, the state defends its right to enrich uranium. In the future, this resource could allow for the creation of weapons. This issue was the main reason for disagreements, journalists write. Let me clarify. Initially, Iran was against negotiations with the US, but then the position changed. The expected outcome of the agreement is the winding down of Tehran's nuclear program and the lifting of sanctions. The number of deaths from the explosion in the port in southern Iran has risen to 25, and more than 1,000 people were injured, the country's authorities reported. Sodium perchlorate exploded in the port. The main component of rocket fuel, reported the New York Times, was in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The preliminary cause is improper handling of the fuel. The exploded substance would have been enough to fuel 260 medium-range missiles. The fire in the port has been ongoing since yesterday. Due to air pollution, the authorities closed schools. Beijing seized a disputed reef in the South China Sea, reports the Financial Times, citing China Central Television. The reef, part of the archipelago, the Spratly, is located a few kilometers from an important Philippine military outpost, Thitu Island, which is used to monitor China's activities in the area. The Chinese Coast Guard raised a flag on the reef, establishing, quote, Beijing's sovereign jurisdiction over the island. The occupied reef is a sandbar with an area of just over 200 square meters, but it holds strategic significance for China, the publication notes. The Chinese Coast Guard left the island after raising the flag, according to the Philippine Maritime Security Service. They added that China's claim of sovereignty means that Beijing might increase its pressure against Manila in the region. The territory of the uninhabited Spratly archipelago is disputed by China, the Philippines, Vietnam, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Brunei. The islands are important due to their geographical location, and studies indicate the presence of significant amounts of oil and gas. The masculine gender is not typical for the word coffee in the Russian language, stated the Vinogradov Institute. They explain that in most cases, borrowed indeclinable nouns have a neuter gender, for example, cocoa, highway, coat. And coffee stands out from the general mass, and the language now get rid of exceptions and align everything under a single logic. Philologists explain that 100 years ago, the word coffee was in the neuter gender. It acquired the masculine gender because in the 19th century it had the form of coffee. Earlier, the same institute stated that the stress in the word zvonit will in the future fall on the first syllable. Almost $400,000 for such a record amount. A letter from a Titanic passenger went under the hammer, reports the newspaper The Guardian. The letter is dated April 10, 1912, and belonged to Colonel Archibald Gracie. It's a magnificent ship, but I will wait until the end of my journey before I make a judgment. Colonel writes in the letter. Archibald Gracie is one of the most famous surviving passengers of the liner. After the disaster, he wrote a book about the catastrophe in which he compiled the memories of dozens of survivors. It was expected that the lot would be sold for 5 times less, writes The Guardian. The letter became the most expensive one written on board the sunken Titanic. Thousands of people lit up the streets of Mexico City in colorful outfits. This is how they celebrated the Dance Day. Subtitles and provided by Dimator Zok. The dancers were dressed in 1950s style costumes. The men wore hats and feathers while the women donned bright skirts. The dancers had been preparing for the performance for several weeks. The event was organized by the city government. It is dedicated to one of the most famous dancers in the USA, Yolanda Montes, who passed away in February this year.